Bakang is one of our further coaches and has been part of the further community for quite some years now, really.
Way back, record days.
I was like, yes, for quite an OG, Bakang Moetse she has been with us as a technical expert, but also as a coach in more recent years. And we are very lucky to have you join us and really unpack a little bit more around your experience with mental health. As a coach, what have you found to be some of the most difficult themes that your entrepreneurs have battled with as within the realm of mental health?
Yeah, brilliant question, Lynn. So I think maybe I'll take a step back to take a step forward. I think entrepreneurship lends itself probably to quite a number of mental health presenting issues, right? And I think that's just part and parcel of the fact that entrepreneurship, especially at the early stages, which you and I are typically dealing with, is all-encompassing, all-consuming, right? And so looking at that as a background or the backdrop upon which entrepreneurship happens, it lends itself to burnout, right? That's probably the top condition. The top condition that I find a lot of entrepreneurs that I have worked with actually deal with. And it's such a hard one to solve, right? Because especially at the early stage in the formative years of the business, you as an entrepreneur are the business, and there is little separation. And if you're just starting out and this is your first time, your first experience as a business owner, you still have to walk that journey of separating or distinguishing yourself from your business, but that in itself is a journey, right? And so I think sometimes it's easy for us to look at it and say, oh, well, you have all this mental health information, all these mental health tools, but it actually is a journey. And I'm not saying that everybody will be susceptible to burnout, but it is actually more common than not, simply because it is a journey to walk out, understanding how you perform best as an entrepreneur and what it means to separate yourself from your business in the early stages when you're really trying to give it your all to ensure that it succeeds. And it can come across as very insensitive when somebody tells you, just separate yourself from your business, take it off. And you're thinking, well, this must succeed, especially if you're an impact entrepreneur, which we often deal with. You're thinking of the lives and the livelihoods that you are hoping to impact, as part of your bigger story.
And you feel pressure to show up and succeed.
Absolutely.
And not let people down.
Absolutely. And so that almost, philosophical kind of pressure that you put on yourself, but also then the real pressure of the fact that you are the CEO, you are the CMO, you are the CIO, you're all of the C's, right? On a very practical basis. You are the C-suite, right? And then the actual physical requirements upon you can also really creep up on you. And when you are in a state of burnout, you are then more susceptible to things like anxiety, depression, and a whole host of other mental health disorders. And this is notwithstanding the fact that you're also human. There could be other things happening in your life as well, or other triggers, or genetic predispositions, that could also impact your likelihood to actually experience mental health challenges on your entrepreneurship journey.
Absolutely. I think it's so important that you've raised this because it's a difficult one to tackle. It's so all-encompassing, and there's so many things that you need to be on this entrepreneurial journey, not just this life journey. But what have you ever experienced burnout, and what have you done to understand what to do better so that you don't fall into that same trap again. I think it's always best to speak from personal experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's something that we all could learn and probably practice better boundaries around this particular topic.
Absolutely. Funny you mentioned that. Side note, I was thinking about how we are often so focused on creating external boundaries, but we never really think about how we institute and enforce our boundaries with ourselves. And I bring that up because in my experience with burnout, it resulted from me not having personal
100%,
boundaries and not having the conviction to enforce my personal boundaries around my health, my sleep, the amount of work that I take on, making time for nutrition and things like that, right?
To say no.
Exactly. So I also, but in that same breath, I also recognize how difficult it is to say no to yourself in the context of being an entrepreneur
100%.
when you are the be all, the end all, the buck stops with you. And that's it, right? But going back to answer the question, I have certainly found myself in way too many situations of burnout, and you know about it, then I would like to confess, but you know what? Everyone has the road that they're supposed to walk in life. And so with me, I remember I'll probably share one of the most impactful experiences that helped me come out of burnout was encountering this resilience manual or resilience book that was shared by one of my previous employers. Ironic because that they were the reason why I was burnt out. But you know, let's not go there. And they started off, so they provided a chart that helped me firstly identify and give language to what I was going through, because a lot of what presents as burnout, especially for high achievers, which entrepreneurs tend to be, just present, you internally think of it as, oh, I'm being lazy, oh, I'm not doing enough, oh, I'm just not feeling up to it, or I'm just feeling sluggish, or I'm not feeling motivated by the work. But it's actually just as a result of when you reach the emotional burnout on top of the physical burnout. So it almost goes in stages, right? So I think having that chart for me that laid out and gave language to the different things that I was feeling but could not place as burnout was the first step. Right.
It's almost like a definition of sorts of what burnout is, because not everybody knows what burnout is.
No.
And I think that's something else to really unpack and understand, because often entrepreneurs do not know that they have it.
No.
Until we actually say you are depleted.
Yeah.
Emotionally, spiritually, physically, and now
mentally,
you are hindered.
Yeah.
Completely.
You cannot make any decisions.
You cannot make any decisions. You find it difficult to actually cope with everyday normal challenges, let alone the big challenges that constantly are thrown at you as an entrepreneur. So it really is that depletion on all of the levels that leaves you feeling like sometimes you can't even feel.
I was actually going to say that.
You numb, you absolutely
you are
depleted.
Everything is
meh. Or literally like, you know, you can just body language, everything. You are just
absolutely
a shadow of your former self.
Oh, absolutely. I was literally going to say that phrase. And so for me, after having the language and being able to identify it, I then secondly had to give myself permission to pause, because, and I mean, I was in a 9-to-5, so I can only imagine how hard that part is for an entrepreneur. If you have, you know, a very small team, or if you're the only person in the team, right? So I had to give myself permission to pause, because the thing with burnout is that the only way to get through it is to actually stop and drop everything so that you can focus on your recovery. It's almost impossible to actually not almost. So I read a study that said it's impossible to treat burnout in short bursts of like I'll take 2 days here off, I'll take 3 days here off. You actually apparently need a minimum of 2 weeks of consecutive rest in order to actually start the recuperation and rejuvenation process. So I had to give myself permission to that.
And that's a minimum.
And that's a minimum.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
You're getting off quite lightly if it's 2 weeks.
Exactly. And it also depends on the stages that I mentioned before of how the extent to which you're burnt out. Right? Yeah. And so after that, the second thing was, after allowing myself to pause, I had to ask for help. Because, and I think that's important in the entrepreneurial context where, of course, things are going to pause. So you have to be okay with asking for help, whether you need people to take care of you or whether you need people to take care of your business or some critical things while you're off. But you absolutely must take an extended consecutive period of days off. And then once I did that, there were 3 key things that I had to focus on. The first was sleep. Sleep is the building block of everything. I think we live in a culture where where there's a lot of rhetoric that goes around, oh, team, no sleep. If while you were sleeping, I was doing 1 million tasks. That is not true. Like, there's no merit to that whatsoever. So first you have to focus on your sleep, because focusing on your sleep enables your body to then regenerate and become rejuvenated and start to perform at a level that is, going towards optimal or going towards normal, and all of the functions that you are then able to, start to improve. Once you've targeted your sleep, the next important thing is nutrition, because then now your body is starting to respond better, and so you need to fuel it better in order that recovery actually starts to happen on a physical level, right? And then once you've done that, then the next most important thing is exercise, getting movement in your body. And I can't stress how important exercise is for mental health. Forget the aesthetic gains, forget the weight loss or muscle gain. It is incredibly imperative for mental health and exercise of any sort, right? You don't have to go in hard at it. Just walking has been shown to be one of the most effective tools from an exercise perspective with regards to maintaining an optimal cardiovascular health as well as mental health. So you don't even need to be doing anything that crazy. And so just following those 3 steps in that order over that extended period of time, and then implementing those into my routine as I gradually got back to work, turned everything around for me. Yeah.
It's wild to think how the strain it places on your whole physical, mental, emotional, spiritual realm.
Absolutely.
And I almost, really want to stress to the entrepreneurs out there that it's almost not worth getting to that point.
100%. That's the message. If you remember nothing else from this conversation, this is it.
Try and not get to that point. It is incredibly difficult to come back.
Oh, yeah.
And your health can be severely impacted from this. Adrenal fatigue, all sorts of other major health issues.
cholesterol.
High cholesterol,
for a long
pressure.
time, because my body just wasn't doing what it's supposed to do. And this is me as somebody who exercises and generally eats healthy, but the high level of cortisol, because I wasn't getting enough sleep, was just causing an incredible spike in my cholesterol that took years to actually bring down to normal.
Years. So that the sleep is really the cornerstone of so much. And recently I was chatting to an entrepreneur where he was like, I'm getting 4 hours of sleep, and I have for the last 18 months to 2 years, and I'm suffering as a result, and it's just not worth it.
It really isn't.
It really, there comes a point where you have to make some really hard decisions about how you show up in your business, right?
Yeah.
But first and foremost, it's how you show up for you, because without you, zero business.
Nothing happens. So it is an investment in your business.
100%.
It really is.
I feel like
And
we
probably
need to
one-
build that, uppercase.
Exactly,
it.
uppercase highlight. It is probably especially as an early stage entrepreneur with a small team still starting out, it's probably one of the highest ROI generating investments you can make
100%.
because you are so critical to the business.
Yes. And if you actually take all this information and really it's a discipline.
Oh,
really.
absolutely.
If you are able to not learn the bad habits that you really can so quickly fall into, which causes burnout, which will lead to burnout.
Yeah.
You would be doing yourself such a favor. And it might seem like a luxury, and people have kind of no. This is, like you said, it's an absolute investment into not just yourself, but your future and your business. So it's really a critical piece to get right, especially when you're starting out, because that's generally when it's almost the hardest.
Absolutely.
I have said to many entrepreneurs, why aren't you putting in your well-being time in your calendar? You would schedule in time with a key stakeholder.
Oh, absolutely.
You would, it's a treat.
An investor, you're like, I'll be there.
I'll be there. In my calendar, it has been for weeks. I'm prepared, I'm ready. You really need to treat yourself like that, because ultimately you are your key stakeholder.
Absolutely.
So it's really getting that mindset and framing it in that way.
Yeah.
Rather than all the other things, really burning the midnight oil and the grind and just on the topic of sleep.
Yeah.
Again, you just aren't able to perform as well or be effective. So it's almost like having those extra hours of sleep and making sure that somehow you get to that point, again, makes you way more productive and effective.
Absolutely. That's the thing. So now with more sleep, you're getting more tasks done in less time.
Yes.
That's the saving.
That's the saving.
That's the math.
I feel like we need to this is the saving, the bonus.
That's it. Exactly. And I think just because, I'm really intrigued by brain health and all sorts of things, but sleep is also one of the number one things that affect your long-term brain health as well, right? So it reduces, getting good sleep now reduces your susceptibility to all sorts of brain linked disorders, Alzheimer's, dementia, and all of that. So that's just
a little extra
there for you in case you weren't convinced. Yeah.
How would you safeguard yourself? Well, let me frame it this way. What advice would you give your 25-year-old self in terms of mental well-being? What would you tell a younger version of yourself? What advice would you give a younger version of yourself, having learned some of these lessons around mental health and how important it is and prevention of burnout?
That's so good. So I think I would say to her to practice boundary setting at every opportunity, and not only boundary setting with other people, but also boundary setting with self. Because I also think, I have come to know as the me that I am now, that some of your biggest regrets will not necessarily come from people disappointing you, but from you disappointing yourself, right? And
truth bomb.
Yeah. And so I would not want her to get to a stage where there's so many regrets as a result of not upholding the boundary of her as being the most important thing in her life and in the future her's life, and her not being the sovereign decision maker about the state of her health and well-being. I would encourage her to actually continue to build and practice good habits and intentionally create good habits, because I think something that we take for granted is that just because we don't have, habits outlined, we think that we don't have habits. But the absence of habits is what actually leads us on a negative habit spiral, right?
Well
so not defining something or not being intentional about creating good habits, it will often lead you to accepting bad habits and accepting those as a norm, simply because you don't force yourself to be proactive or to be reflective about the habits that you create in your life. And yeah, I'm a huge believer in habit formation. And so I think as an entrepreneur, that is one of the most critical things that you can commit to that will pay lifelong dividends.
Absolutely. I think for you you've almost got to treat yourself as the investment.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got to really be investing, and that investment will pay for itself, really.
Absolutely.
Keep on.
Exactly.
Keep on paying.
And the great thing about starting early is that you only need to make small incremental changes that don't actually take up a lot of your day. The opportunity cost isn't that high on a day-to-day. However, if you wait until the point of burnout, the opportunity cost of starting becomes so much higher. The resistance becomes so much greater because you're so entrenched in the bad habits, in the, the non-reflective way of living, that it becomes a lot more difficult to pick it up at a later stage.
100%. I also think, every day is different, and you want to have consistency in your self-care practice.
Absolutely.
But every day is different, and you might have a crazy deadline or something that comes up. And I've learned that it really helps to have a handle on what's coming up so that you can really prepare. Sometimes you know that you're going to have those pressure points, and you almost need to create even more sort of, I guess, a well-being strategy around those crunch times.
Absolutely.
So that you bring in the extra support. You know it's going to be hardcore, full on, and it's really going to test you and deplete you, and almost really having the extra support around those crunch times.
Absolutely.
And then also being able to kind of go, cool, well, then I do need a downtime after that. I can't be going wah.
Absolutely.
Forever in a day. There's got to be sort of, so again, I'd like to encourage our entrepreneurs to be intentional about what you take on and when, so that you are able to plan a little bit better and in that safeguarding your own mental well-being.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the concepts I really enjoy is the concept of environment design. And it speaks to exactly what you're saying, in that you need to assess your life and then assess what you need at certain times, depending on what's going on, in order that you can design a conducive environment to be your best self or to produce your best output, given certain things happening or you being in certain phases or seasons of your life, right? So just that idea of being able to recognize upfront, okay, it's going to be an incredibly high stress period. And I know that in high stress periods, I tend to use my Uber Eats app too much. I tend to eat fries only. So perhaps if I know I'm going to have a string of meetings in 1 week, what do? I meal prep. I ensure that, I have some healthy snacks stored in my cupboard a couple of Pro Vitas. They're boring, but I mean, they're not as bad as a Kit Kat, you know? And so for that week, I've designed my environment to support me to produce the best output that I can and to be my best self, to show up as my best self, so that at the end of that week, I'm actually in a position where I'm celebrating because I didn't let myself go, but I also achieved the thing that I set out to.
Yes, absolutely. It's these different ways that you can support yourself.
Yeah.
And in supporting yourself, you are able to sit in your power and really enjoy the journey.
Absolutely.
With all its twists and turns. I mean, we all know it's quite spicy out there, but
Linz, that's exactly the reason.
Yes.
The journey will have twists and turns that you cannot control. And so what are the things that are within your control?
Yes.
And how do you place those strategically around you?
100%. And I think that is really part of the puzzle. If you can start to unlock and really understand those things, support yourself better with those things in place, it really does make the journey a lot easier and navigating those twists and turns. And the enjoyment,
absolutely.
because you're not so depleted, you'd be able to really enjoy those pockets of peace and happiness and all the things that come with really the results of being better supported.
Absolutely. And I think just off what you're saying about being better supported and perhaps, you know, delving into one of the key things that entrepreneurs experience as a challenge that does contribute to mental health issues or the worsening of is how lonely the entrepreneurship journey is. And so it's so important, whether you are dealing with a mental health issue or whether you are in a high stress period and you actually haven't gone to that burnout stage, to get support around you and to, you know, have you can have all of these systems. You must have all of these systems as well, but one of the most critical ones is the support system, is the accountability system. And so that's part of our job as coaches, right? To try to provide support and to highlight it. Okay, I think that you might be a bit high strung here, perhaps take some rest, but a constant has just been that a lot of entrepreneurs lament about how lonely the journey is because of how much they have to take on. And so I definitely say one of the biggest things is to ensure that you have people, a community, a therapist, if that's the kind of support that you need as part of your village. There's that saying that says it takes a village to raise a child, but I've adopted it for myself. I'm like, it takes a village to raise a baby girl, okay?
Yeah. It takes
baby girls, baby boys,
baby businesses.
Get yourself a village.
And that's a beautiful place to leave it. Thank you so much for being part of our village.
Oh, I'm so glad. So glad you guys are part of mine.
Such a privilege to have someone who is so insightful and really takes you have this holistic view, which we so appreciate.
Thank you.
So that's it from us. Thank you so much.
You.